The smell of diesel exhaust drifting through my bedroom window at 6 in the morning shouldn't have been anyone's business but mine, especially since my generator sat 40 feet from the nearest property line and ran cleaner than most cars on the road. I rolled over in bed, listening to the steady hum of the Kohler unit outside, and felt a strange sense of satisfaction knowing that while the rest of Sunset Ridge Estates dealt with another unplanned power outage, my house stayed warm, my refrigerator kept running, and my home office remained operational. The satisfaction lasted exactly 3 hours before Patricia Hendricks from the HOA showed up at my door with a clipboard, a scowl, and what she promised would be the first of many fines. I opened the door wearing my work clothes, phone pressed to my ear as I wrapped up a conference call with a client in Boston. Patricia stood there in her typical uniform of a beige pantsuit and expensive sunglasses pushed up into her highlighted blonde hair, tapping her sensible heel against my welcome mat like she owned the place. I held up one finger, asking her to wait, which only made her face redden. "Trevor, we need to talk about your generator," she said the moment I ended the call, not bothering with pleasantries. "What about it?" I asked, genuinely confused. I had done my research before installation, made sure everything was legal and up to code. The electrician had pulled all the proper permits through the county, and I even had the unit positioned to minimize noise for my neighbors. The smell is absolutely unacceptable. Do you have any idea how toxic those fumes are? Mrs. Chen, 2 houses down, says she can smell it in her backyard. The Robertsons are complaining about it drifting into their pool area. This is a health hazard, Trevor Ingram, and the board will not tolerate it. I leaned against the doorframe, trying to process what she was saying. "Patricia, it's a commercial-grade generator that meets all EPA standards. The power's been out since 3 this morning. What exactly am I supposed to do when we have outages every other week? That's not my problem. What is my problem is that you're violating Section 12.4 of the HOA covenants regarding noxious odors and air quality. I'm issuing you a citation for $500, and if the smell continues, you'll receive another one every day until the issue is resolved." She thrust a printed notice into my hand. The document looked official, complete with the HOA letterhead and legal language that probably took her all of 10 minutes to generate from some template she found online. I read through it quickly, my blood pressure rising with each ridiculous word. This is insane. You can't fine me for running a generator during a power outage. It's essential equipment. The HOA has very clear rules about maintaining air quality and preventing disturbances to other residents. Your generator violates both. Either fix it or get rid of it. You have 5 days before the next fine. She turned on her heel and walked back to her white Lexus SUV, leaving me standing in the doorway holding a piece of paper that might as well have been toilet tissue for all the legal validity it had. I called my lawyer, David Ortega, before the SUV even made it out of my driveway. David listened to my explanation with the patient silence of someone who had dealt with overzealous HOA boards before. When I finished, he let out a long sigh. "Do you have documentation that the generator meets emission standards?" "Everything. The manufacturer specs, the installation permits, the EPA compliance certificate. I bought this unit specifically because it's one of the cleanest burning generators on the market. It's the same model they use at hospitals and data centers." "Good. Don't pay the fine. Respond in writing to the HOA board within 48 hours, cite the relevant facts, and request a hearing. I'll draft something for you. In the meantime, document everything. Take photos of the installation. Keep a log of when you run it and why, and get statements from any neighbors who don't have a problem with it. Half the neighborhood has generators, Patricia included. I've seen hers run during outages. Even better, document that too. This sounds like selective enforcement, which is where we can really nail them if it goes to court. I spent the rest of that morning taking pictures and making notes. My generator sat on a concrete pad behind my house, enclosed in a weatherproof housing that dampened the sound. The exhaust pipe pointed away from neighboring properties, directed toward the tree line at the back of my lot. I measured distances, checked sight lines, and wrote down every technical specification I could find. My neighbor to the right, Frank Morrison, came over around noon while I was outside with my measuring tape. Frank was a retired engineer in his 60s who had helped me plan the generator installation months ago. "Patricia came by giving you grief?" he asked, already knowing the answer. $500 fine for exhaust smell, threatening daily fines until I remove it or fix it, whatever that means. Frank shook his head. She tried the same thing with the Hendersons last year over their vegetable garden, said it attracted pests and lowered property values. They fought it and won, but it cost them $3,000 in legal fees. Patricia backed off before it went to actual court, but only after she made their lives hell for 6 months. Why does she do this? Power trip. She retired from some middle management position at an insurance company and decided being HOA president was her new career. The woman lives for finding violations. You should see the binder she keeps. Every house in the neighborhood has a file. That's creepy. It's Patricia. You want my advice? Don't just fight this. Go on offense. Request all the HOA records related to generator complaints, noise complaints, and air quality issues. I guarantee she's been selective about enforcement. The Williamson's generator is twice as loud as yours and runs on straight gasoline. I've never heard of her complaining about that. I thanked Frank for the advice and went back inside to call David. He agreed that requesting records was smart and said he'd file the appropriate document requests along with my response to the citation. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening, 3 days after Patricia's visit. David advised me to attend and speak during the public comment period, so I cleared my schedule and prepared what I wanted to say. I printed copies of all my documentation, included photographs, emission reports, and the manufacturer's certification that my generator met all federal and state environmental standards. Thursday came faster than I expected. The meeting was held in the community center at 7, a bland rectangular building at the neighborhood entrance that also served as a gym and event space. I arrived 15 minutes early and found 30 other residents already there, way more than usually attended these things. Patricia sat at a table in the front with 4 other board members, shuffling papers and checking her phone. The meeting started with standard business: approval of last month's minutes, treasurer's report, discussion of landscaping bids for the common areas. I sat through it all, watching Patricia run the meeting with the efficiency of someone who had done this 100 times. She was organized, I had to give her that, but there was something cold about the way she conducted business, like she was more interested in process than people. When the agenda reached new business, she looked directly at me. "We have a resident here tonight who received a citation this week for air quality violations. Trevor Ingram, would you like to address the board?" I stood and walked to the front, handing each board member a copy of my documentation packet. I received a citation Monday morning for $500, claiming my generator produces noxious odors that violate HOA covenants. I'm here to show you that my generator not only meets all local and federal emission standards, but exceeds them. This is a commercial-grade unit designed for sensitive environments. The documentation in front of you includes EPA compliance certificates, emission test results, and manufacturer specifications. My generator produces fewer emissions than most cars. Patricia didn't even glance at the papers. The complaint isn't about whether your generator meets government minimums. It's about whether it's appropriate for a residential neighborhood. Several residents have complained about the smell. That makes it a nuisance under our covenants. Which residents specifically? I asked. And have you investigated their claims? My generator is positioned 40 feet from the nearest property line, behind sound-dampening housing, with the exhaust directed away from neighboring homes. I've spoken with my immediate neighbors, and none of them have complained. The identities of complainants are confidential, Patricia said, but I've personally verified the smell is noticeable from multiple properties. On what date and time did you verify this? She hesitated. I don't have those details with me, because I keep a log of when the generator runs. It only operates during power outages or for weekly maintenance tests that last 15 minutes. If you personally verified a smell problem, it should correspond with times the generator was actually running. I'd be happy to compare notes. One of the other board members, a younger guy named Marcus Chen, leaned forward. Trevor, I don't think anyone's questioning the technical specs of your equipment, but if neighbors are complaining, we have to take that seriously. Is there any way to reduce the smell? A different fuel maybe, or a filter system. It already has a 3-stage emission control system. It runs on ultra-low sulfur diesel and produces less odor than a lawn mower. I'm not opposed to solutions, but I need to understand the actual problem first. If this is about the smell during normal operation, I'd like documentation of when complaints occurred and who made them. If it's about me having a generator at all, then we need to talk about why I'm being singled out when at least a dozen other houses have similar equipment. Patricia's face tightened. This isn't about other residents. We're discussing your violation. It becomes about other residents when the enforcement is selective. That's actually illegal under HOA governance laws. Boards must enforce rules consistently across all properties. The meeting devolved from there. Patricia tried to shut down further discussion, but other residents started chiming in. 2 people spoke up about how useful generators were during the increasingly frequent power outages. Another complained about the noise from a different neighbor's generator, asking why Patricia wasn't addressing that one. Someone else brought up that Patricia herself had a generator, which she claimed was different because it was properly maintained, though she couldn't explain how that was relevant to smell complaints. By the time public comment ended, I hadn't resolved anything, but I had made my position clear. Patricia scheduled a follow-up hearing for 2 weeks out to specifically address generator policies in the neighborhood. She also maintained that my fine stood unless I stopped running the generator entirely. I left the meeting frustrated but not defeated. David had attended remotely via phone, listening from my jacket pocket, and he called me as soon as I reached my car. That went better than expected, he said. She showed her hand. The confidential complainants, the refusal to provide documentation, the admission that other generators exist, but yours is somehow special. That's all useful. File a formal document request tomorrow for all generator-related complaints and enforcement actions from the past 3 years. Also request the dates and times Patricia personally verified your smell complaint. You think she's making it up? I think she doesn't like you for some reason and decided your generator was an easy target. The question is why? Have you had any other interactions with her before this? I thought back over the 18 months I'd lived in Sunset Ridge Estates. She tried to get me to join some neighborhood watch committee last year. I declined because of work, and she wasn't happy when I put up a fence without pre-approval, but I fixed that by filing the paperwork retroactively. There's your answer. Patricia doesn't like residents who don't fall in line. You've established yourself as someone who doesn't automatically defer to her authority, so now she's making an example of you. The next morning, I sent the formal document requests via certified mail. I also called an environmental inspector recommended by David, a guy named Robert Chen, who did emissions testing for commercial properties. Robert agreed to come out Monday to do an independent assessment of my generator's actual emissions and odor output. The weekend passed quietly. The power stayed on, so I didn't need to run the generator except for the weekly 15-minute maintenance cycle on Saturday morning. I made sure to document it with video, showing the minimal exhaust and how quickly it dissipated. I also walked the perimeter of my property and the two adjacent ones, confirming that no smell was detectable from either neighbor's yard. Monday afternoon, Robert showed up with enough equipment to test a factory. He spent 3 hours examining my generator, testing emissions, measuring particulate output, and even doing odor assessment with some kind of calibrated sensor equipment I didn't know existed. When he finished, he sat with me at my kitchen table to review the results. Your generator is exceptionally clean. Emissions are less than half the EPA threshold for commercial stationary engines. Particulate matter is negligible. The odor signature is minimal and well within acceptable ranges for residential areas. Honestly, I test industrial sites that don't perform this well. Can you put that in a report? Already writing it. I'll have something formal to you by Wednesday. This is the kind of equipment I'd recommend for schools or hospitals. Whoever's complaining either has a hypersensitive nose or another agenda. I thanked Robert and paid his fee, adding his invoice to my growing file of generator-related expenses. The HOA fine was starting to cost me more than just $500. Between the lawyer, the inspector, and the time I'd spent dealing with this instead of working, I was in for over $2,000 already. Wednesday brought Robert's report, a 12-page document with charts, graphs, and enough technical detail to choke a scientist. The conclusion was clear. My generator met or exceeded all relevant emission and odor standards for residential, commercial, and industrial use. David reviewed it and said it was exactly what we needed. The follow-up hearing was scheduled for Thursday evening. David planned to attend this one in person, and I prepared a presentation that laid out everything methodically. I had photos, emission reports, maintenance logs, manufacturer specs, and Robert's independent assessment. I even included a comparison showing that my generator's emissions were lower than the average vehicle, meaning every car driving through the neighborhood produced more pollution than my stationary generator. Thursday evening arrived cold and clear. I met David at the community center, and we walked in together carrying 2 briefcases worth of documentation. The turnout was even larger than the previous meeting, probably 60 residents filling the folding chairs. Apparently, generator policy had become the hot neighborhood topic. Patricia called the meeting to order right at 7. She rushed through preliminary business, clearly wanting to get to the main event. When she reached the generator hearing item, she looked at me with an expression that tried for neutral but landed somewhere around hostile. We're here to address the continued violation of air quality standards by Trevor Ingram's generator. Trevor, you have 15 minutes to present your case to the board. David stood. If I may, I'm David Ortega, representing Mr. Ingram in this matter. Before we begin, I'd like to request the documents we formally asked for 2 weeks ago. We sent a certified request for all generator-related complaints and enforcement actions from the past 3 years, as well as documentation of when Board President Patricia Hendricks personally verified the smell complaints. We haven't received any response. Patricia shuffled papers. Those documents are being compiled. We'll provide them when ready. Under Georgia law, HOA boards must respond to written document requests within 10 business days. It's been 12. We'll need those documents tonight, or this hearing should be postponed until they are provided. I don't have them with me. Then, I move to postpone this hearing until proper documentation is provided and Mr. Ingram can adequately prepare his defense. One of the other board members, an older woman named Susan Park, spoke up. Patricia, if we don't have the requested documents, he has a point. We should probably reschedule. Patricia's jaw tightened. We can proceed with the information we have. Trevor's generator is the issue here, not historical complaints about other properties. David remained standing. Actually, historical enforcement is directly relevant. If the board has selectively enforced rules or allowed other similar violations to continue, that's material to whether this fine is valid. It's also relevant to determine if this is targeted harassment rather than legitimate rule enforcement. Are you accusing me of harassment? Patricia's voice went up an octave. I'm stating legal facts. Selective enforcement and targeted citations are forms of harassment under HOA governance law. That's why documentation matters. The room got very quiet. Another board member, Marcus Chen, cleared his throat. Patricia, maybe we should just get the documents. You have them in your office, some of them. Can you grab them? This feels like it could get complicated if we don't do this right. Patricia clearly didn't want to, but with the whole room watching, she had little choice. She stood and walked out, returning 5 minutes later with a thin folder. David accepted it and spent several minutes reviewing the contents while everyone waited. This folder contains 3 generator complaints from the past 3 years, David finally said. One was from 2022, regarding a noise issue that was resolved when the resident installed sound dampening. One was from 2023, regarding a generator that violated setback requirements, also resolved. The third is Mr. Ingram's current citation. Is this everything? That's what I have, Patricia said. So in 3 years, across a neighborhood of 200 homes, there have been only 3 generator complaints, and 2 were resolved cooperatively. Yet you're treating Mr. Ingram's situation as an emergency requiring immediate fines and daily penalties. Can you explain the difference? The other situations were different. How? They just were. Different circumstances. David set the folder down. You stated in the previous meeting that you personally verified smell complaints from multiple properties. When did you conduct this verification? I don't recall the exact date. Was it during a power outage when Mr. Ingram's generator was running? I believe so. You believe so, but you don't have documentation of the date or time. I don't document every single thing I do for the HOA. But you documented enough to issue a $500 fine within hours of the alleged verification. You must have noted something. Patricia didn't answer. The silence stretched out awkwardly until Susan Park intervened. Trevor, why don't you present your materials? I think we all want to hear what you found. I took over from David, walking the board through everything methodically. I showed photos of the installation, explained the emission control systems, and presented Robert's independent inspection report. I displayed the EPA compliance certificates and manufacturer specifications. I pulled up my maintenance logs showing the generator only ran during power outages or for brief weekly tests. I even showed videos demonstrating how little visible exhaust the unit produced and how quickly it dissipated. This generator meets every commercial emission standard, I concluded. It's cleaner than most cars, quieter than most lawn mowers, and positioned to minimize any impact on neighbors. I've spoken with everyone adjacent to my property, and none of them have complaints. I've done everything right, followed every rule, and exceeded every requirement. I'm asking the board to withdraw this citation and work with me cooperatively if there are legitimate concerns. Marcus Chen was the first to respond. I'm looking at this inspection report, and these numbers are impressive. Trevor, you've clearly done your homework. Patricia, who exactly complained about the smell, can you give us any details? As I said before, complainant identities are confidential. But you can tell us how many people complained, right? Was it one person, 5 people, 10? Patricia hesitated just long enough to be noticeable. Multiple residents. That's not a number. 2 residents made formal complaints. 2. Marcus looked at the papers in front of him. So 2 people out of 200 homes complained and were imposing $500 fines with threats of daily penalties. That seems excessive. Susan Park agreed. It does seem like we might be overreacting. Trevor's done everything by the book. Maybe we should withdraw the citation and just ask him to monitor the situation. If more complaints come in, we can revisit it. Patricia's face had gone red. The citation stands. The rules are clear about noxious odors. But the independent inspector says there isn't a noxious odor, Marcus countered. And I've driven past Trevor's house during outages. I've never noticed any smell. I'm not comfortable continuing this fine without better evidence of an actual violation. Another board member, James Williamson, finally spoke up. He'd been silent the whole evening. I agree with Marcus and Susan. This feels like we're creating a problem where none exists. Trevor's generator is probably the cleanest one in the neighborhood. My own generator smells like a lawn mower. If we're going to enforce odor standards, we should do it consistently, and we should have clear measurements of what's acceptable and what's not. An independent inspector saying the emissions are minimal is a pretty strong indication there's no violation. 3 board members against Patricia. The 5th member, an elderly man named Robert Schultz, had barely been paying attention. Patricia looked at him desperately. Robert, what do you think? Robert glanced up from his phone. What? Oh, the generator thing. Seems fine to me. The man's got all the paperwork. I don't see a problem. That was it. 4-1 against Patricia, though there hadn't been an actual vote yet. David sensed the moment. I'd like to request a formal board vote on whether to uphold or withdraw the citation against Mr. Ingram. Patricia tried one more time. This isn't something we can just vote away. There are complaints on record. From 2 people, Marcus said. Neither of whom are here tonight, neither of whom you can name, and neither of whom have any technical basis for their complaint given this inspection report. I move to withdraw the citation and issue a written apology to Trevor for the inconvenience. Second, Susan said immediately. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue more, but she was out of options. All in favor? 4 hands went up. Patricia's didn't. The vote was recorded, and just like that, the citation was gone. The meeting continued with other business, but I barely paid attention. I had won, but the victory felt hollow. Patricia's expression made it clear this wasn't over in her mind. After the meeting, several residents came up to shake my hand and congratulate me. Frank Morrison clapped me on the shoulder. Well fought. Patricia needed someone to stand up to her. Maybe this will make her think twice before going after people with made-up violations. David and I walked out together into the cool evening air. That went well, he said. Better than well, actually. It's rare to see a board overturn their president so decisively. She really overplayed her hand. You think she'll come after me again? Probably. People like Patricia don't like losing. My advice is to document everything going forward. Every interaction, every rule you follow, every maintenance task. Make yourself bulletproof. And if she does cite you again, we'll have a paper trail showing harassment. I drove home feeling relieved but uneasy. The generator issue was resolved, but I now had an enemy on the HOA board, and Patricia struck me as someone who held grudges. The next few weeks passed quietly. The power went out twice more during spring storms, and my generator ran without incident. I made sure to note every operation in my log, complete with timestamps and duration. Patricia didn't contact me, and I didn't see her around the neighborhood. Then May arrived, and with it, a new citation. This one was for my fence being 6 inches too tall according to HOA covenants. The same fence I'd installed 2 years ago, the same fence Patricia had complained about then, and the same fence I'd gotten approved after filing the proper paperwork. The fine was $300. I called David immediately. She's doing it again. Different violation, but same playbook. Petty citation with no warning, immediate fine, veiled threats of escalation. You have the original fence approval documents? Of course, send them to me. I'll draft a response. This is definitely harassment now. We have a pattern. I sent over the documents and wrote a detailed response to the HOA board, copying all members. I pointed out that the fence had been approved in writing 2 years ago, that it hadn't changed in any way since then, and that re-citing an approved structure appeared to be retaliatory harassment following my successful challenge of the generator citation. I kept the tone professional but firm. Patricia responded within hours with an email claiming the original approval was invalid because the fence exceeded height restrictions in the covenants. She included a copy of the specific rule, which did indeed state that fences could be no more than 6 feet tall. My fence was 6 feet 6 inches at its highest point along a slope in my backyard. David read the exchange and laughed, though not in an amused way. She's not even trying to hide it now. The approval document you have was signed by her. She approved a fence that violated the rules, and now she's citing you for following the approval she gave you. That's not just harassment, that's possibly fraud or negligence. What do? We're going to request a hearing again. But this time, we're also going to file a complaint with the county about HOA misconduct. Patricia is creating legal liability for the association, and the other board members need to know that. If this keeps up, someone's going to sue, and the HOA's insurance won't cover intentional harassment. The hearing on the fence citation was scheduled for early June. In the intervening weeks, 2 more citations arrived. One claimed my lawn maintenance was inadequate because some clover had grown in the grass. Another stated that my trash cans were visible from the street on a non-collection day. Despite being in the same location, I'd always kept them, tucked beside my garage. Each citation came with fines ranging from $100 to $200. Each one was technically based on covenant language, but applied in the most nitpicky, absurd way possible. The clover in my lawn was literally for plants. The trash cans were visible only if you stood at a specific angle at the edge of my driveway and looked directly at them. I documented everything, responded in writing to each citation, and refused to pay any fines. David filed complaints with the county HOA Ombudsman's office, citing harassment and selective enforcement. We also sent a formal cease and desist letter to Patricia personally, warning her that continued baseless citations would result in a civil lawsuit for harassment. The June hearing was tense from the start. Patricia had clearly been preparing, bringing printed copies of every covenant that I'd allegedly violated. The other board members looked uncomfortable, and Marcus Chen kept glancing at me with apologetic expressions. David started by laying out the pattern. In the past 2 months, Mr. Ingram has received 5 citations totaling over $1,000 in fines. The first citation, regarding his generator, was withdrawn by this board after being proven baseless. Since then, he's been cited for a fence that was approved by this board 2 years ago, for minor lawn imperfections that exist in every yard in this neighborhood, and for trash can placement that's identical to dozens of other homes. This is textbook harassment, and it needs to stop. Patricia responded with a lengthy explanation of how she was simply enforcing the covenants as written, that her job as president required diligence, and that she couldn't play favorites by ignoring violations. Susan Park cut her off mid-sentence. "Patricia, I drove through the neighborhood yesterday specifically looking at fences, lawns, and trash cans. I saw at least 20 properties with issues identical to or worse than what you're citing Trevor for, including your own house, where your trash cans were visible from the street and you have more clover in your lawn than Trevor does. Why aren't you citing those properties? I can't catch every violation, but you seem to catch every single one at Trevor's house, often within days or even hours. That's not enforcement, that's surveillance," Marcus joined in. "I got a copy of the cease and desist letter Trevor's lawyer sent. I also talked to the county ombudsman. They said this kind of targeted enforcement is illegal and that the HOA could face sanctions if it continues." "Patricia, I don't know what your issue with Trevor is, but you're creating liability for all of us. We're volunteers on this board. I didn't sign up to get sued because you have a personal vendetta." The meeting devolved into an argument between Patricia and the other board members. James Williamson suggested that Patricia step down as president. Robert Schultz seconded the motion. Patricia refused, claiming she'd done nothing wrong and that she was being attacked for trying to maintain neighborhood standards. The vote on removing Patricia as president failed, 3 in favor and 2 against, because HOA bylaws required a 2/3 majority. But the vote to withdraw all 5 citations against me passed 4-1, with only Patricia opposing. The board also passed a resolution requiring all future citations to be reviewed and approved by at least 3 board members before being issued, effectively stripping Patricia of her power to unilaterally fine residents. I left the meeting feeling vindicated but exhausted. The stress of dealing with constant citations, the expense of legal fees, and the time lost from work were taking their toll. David assured me the worst was over now that the board had reined Patricia in, but I wasn't so sure. Summer arrived with its usual heat and humidity. The power outages continued, and my generator ran regularly. I maintained meticulous logs, photographed everything, and kept my property in impeccable condition. I wasn't going to give Patricia any legitimate reason to come after me. For a while, it seemed like the drama was over. I didn't receive any new citations. Patricia stopped responding to my emails, even the routine ones about neighborhood business. The HOA newsletter, which Patricia wrote, stopped mentioning my name entirely. Then July brought a development I didn't see coming. Frank Morrison called me on a Tuesday morning, his voice agitated. "Trevor, you need to see what Patricia did. Check the HOA website." I pulled up the site and found a new page titled Covenant Enforcement Actions. It listed every property in the neighborhood that had received citations in the past year, including the nature of the violation and the fine amount. My address was listed 5 times with detailed descriptions of each citation, including the ones that had been withdrawn. The page made it look like I was a serial rule violator who had gotten away with multiple infractions. I called David immediately. Is this legal? She's basically published a list of accusations against me that the board already determined were baseless. It's defamation. She's publishing false information that harms your reputation. This crossed a line. We're not sending letters anymore. We're filing suit. David drafted a lawsuit against Patricia Hendricks personally, alleging harassment, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We also named the HOA as a defendant for failing to properly supervise their board president and allowing the harassment to continue despite multiple warnings. The lawsuit asked for damages covering my legal fees, lost work time, and emotional distress, plus punitive damages to send a message. We filed in county court in early August. The process server delivered the summons to Patricia at her home on a Saturday afternoon. I heard she slammed the door in his face and called the police, claiming she was being harassed. The police apparently explained that being served with a lawsuit wasn't harassment and left. The lawsuit changed everything. Within days, I received calls from 3 different board members apologizing and asking if there was any way to settle this before it went further. Marcus Chen practically begged me to consider mediation. Susan Parks sent a long email expressing regret that things had gotten so out of hand. David advised me to hear them out. The board members are realizing they could lose this lawsuit, and it could cost the HOA a significant amount of money. That comes out of everyone's HOA fees. They're motivated to fix this. We agreed to a mediation session scheduled for late August. The HOA's insurance company got involved, sending their own lawyer to represent the association's interests. Patricia hired her own attorney, a stern-looking woman who spent the first hour of mediation arguing that Patricia had done nothing wrong. The mediation lasted 7 hours. Patricia's attorney tried to claim that all the citations were legitimate, and that I was the one harassing Patricia by refusing to comply with reasonable rules. David systematically dismantled every argument, presenting the withdrawn citations, the inspection reports, the approval documents, and the evidence of selective enforcement. The breakthrough came when the HOA's insurance lawyer pulled their attorney aside for a private conversation. When they came back, the insurance lawyer was blunt. Our company is not going to cover intentional harassment or defamation claims. If this goes to trial and Mr. Ingram wins, the board members could be personally liable. We're recommending the HOA settle and remove Mrs. Hendricks from the board. Patricia exploded. You can't remove me. I was elected. I have rights. You have the right to bankrupt yourself in a lawsuit you'll probably lose, the insurance lawyer said coldly. But you don't have the right to create liability for everyone else in this neighborhood. The association is going to settle. What you do personally is your choice. We hammered out terms over the next 2 hours. The HOA would pay $30,000 to cover my legal fees and compensate me for the time and stress. They would remove the covenant enforcement page from the website, send a written apology to all residents explaining that the citations against me were improper, and implement new policies for citation procedures requiring oversight and documentation. Patricia would resign from the board, effective immediately. She would also pay me an additional $10,000 personally for the defamation claim, with the payment structured to come from her personal funds rather than any HOA insurance. And she would sign a non-disparagement agreement barring her from discussing me or this case with other residents. Patricia refused at first, insisting she'd rather go to trial. Her attorney took her out of the room for 30 minutes. When they came back, Patricia's eyes were red and her expression was defeated. She signed the settlement agreement without speaking. The formal documents were executed by early September. I received the HOA's payment within a week. Patricia's payment took longer. She apparently had to liquidate some investments to come up with the cash, but it arrived by the end of the month. The HOA sent out a newsletter explaining that there had been procedural irregularities in recent enforcement actions, and that new policies were being implemented to ensure fair treatment for all residents. Patricia's resignation was announced in the same newsletter, framed as her decision to step down for personal reasons. I knew the truth, and so did the board members, but we'd agreed not to publicly discuss the details of the settlement. Life in Sunset Ridge Estates slowly returned to normal. Marcus Chen was elected the new board president, and he immediately implemented changes. Citation procedures now required documentation, photo evidence, and review by multiple board members. Residents were entitled to warnings before fines for first-time violations. And the board committed to conducting neighborhood-wide reviews to ensure rules were enforced consistently. My generator continued to run during power outages without complaint. In fact, at the September board meeting, Marcus proposed updating the covenants to explicitly allow generators that met commercial emission standards, using my situation as the example of why such equipment was valuable. The proposal passed unanimously. I ran into Patricia once more after everything settled at the grocery store in late October. We made eye contact across the produce section, and for a moment, I thought she might say something. Instead, she turned and walked away quickly, leaving her half-filled cart behind. I finished my shopping and went home, feeling an odd mixture of sympathy and satisfaction. The whole ordeal taught me several things. First, HOA boards can be great community resources when run by reasonable people, but they can become nightmare bureaucracies when controlled by petty tyrants. Second, documentation is everything. If I hadn't kept detailed logs, taken photos, and gathered professional inspections, I never could have fought back effectively. Third, standing up to bullies is expensive and exhausting, but sometimes necessary. David sent me a final bill in November, tallying up all the hours he'd spent on my case. Even with the settlement money, I'd spent significant time and energy on something that never should have been an issue. But I'd also established a precedent. Other residents now knew they could challenge improper citations, and that the board had to follow fair procedures. Frank Morrison came over for a beer one evening in December, as we were both hanging Christmas lights. We sat on my back patio within sight of my generator and talked about the whole crazy situation. "You think Patricia learned anything from all this?" Frank asked. "Probably not. People like her rarely do, but maybe she'll think twice before she goes after someone else." "You going to stay in the neighborhood? I know this has been rough." I looked around at my house, my yard, and the generator humming quietly through its weekly test cycle. "Yeah, I'm staying. I like it here, and I'm not going to let one difficult person run me out of my own home. Besides, things are better now. Marcus is doing a good job as president. He is. The board meetings are actually productive now instead of just Patricia's power hour." We finished our beers and went back to our respective light displays. The neighborhood looked beautiful with decorations going up, families walking around in the evening to see the displays, kids playing in yards. This was what an HOA was supposed to support: community, cooperation, and reasonable standards that maintained property values without making life miserable. Christmas came and went without incident. New Year's arrived, and with it came another major winter storm that knocked out power across half the county. My generator kicked on automatically, keeping my house warm and functional while the neighborhood went dark. This time, nobody complained. In fact, 3 neighbors came over to ask about my generator model and installation process, wanting to get their own systems set up properly. I walked them through everything I'd learned, shared my research on emission standards and equipment specifications, and gave them Robert's contact information for installation guidance. It felt good to help people avoid the mistakes and conflicts I'd experienced. By late January, Marcus called to tell me that 5 more houses had installed generators, all following similar guidelines to mine, and that the board had officially updated the covenants to permit them with basic requirements for setbacks and sound dampening. What had started as Patricia's personal crusade against me had actually resulted in the neighborhood adopting better, clearer policies that benefited everyone. The February HOA meeting included a discussion of further covenant updates. Susan Park proposed removing some of the more ridiculous rules that had been used to justify nitpicky citations. Things like the absolute prohibition on visible trash cans or the ban on specific types of plants. The board agreed to form a committee to review all the covenants and recommend modifications. I volunteered for the committee, figuring I had enough experience with problematic rules to provide useful input. We spent 3 months reviewing the documents, comparing them to covenants from other neighborhoods, and consulting with a real estate attorney about best practices. The result was a streamlined set of rules that focused on legitimate issues, like structural maintenance and safety, while eliminating petty restrictions that served no real purpose. The revised covenants were presented to the neighborhood in May for a vote. Under Georgia law, changing HOA covenants required approval from 2/3 of homeowners, a high bar that many associations struggled to meet. But our changes were so clearly reasonable that they passed with over 80% support. I saw Patricia one more time during this process, at the covenant vote meeting. She arrived late, sitting in the back row, and didn't speak during the discussion. When the vote was called, I noticed she voted against the changes, one of only 12 residents who did. After the results were announced, she left immediately, still not speaking to anyone. Frank Morrison told me later that Patricia had put her house on the market. He'd heard from another neighbor that she was moving to a condo downtown, somewhere without an HOA. I felt a small measure of relief at the news. It would be easier for everyone if she moved on. The sale went through in July. I watched from my window as the moving truck loaded her furniture, Patricia supervising with the same intense attention to detail she'd brought to HOA enforcement. She never looked toward my house. When the truck pulled away, followed by her white Lexus, I felt a chapter closing. A young couple with 2 small children bought Patricia's house. They introduced themselves to the neighborhood at a summer barbecue, enthusiastic about the community and excited to be first-time homeowners. I welcomed them and made sure to mention that the HOA was friendly and reasonable under the current leadership. They seemed relieved to hear it. By August, a full year after the settlement, life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. My generator ran when needed, my property remained well maintained, and I had productive relationships with the current board members. I'd even made friends with several neighbors who'd supported me during the conflict with Patricia. The power infrastructure in our area gradually improved over the following year. The utility company upgraded transformers and reinforced lines, reducing the frequency of outages. My generator still ran occasionally, but not as often as before. Each time it did, I appreciated having the equipment and being able to keep my household running smoothly. I never regretted standing up to Patricia's harassment, but I also recognized how fortunate I was to have the resources to fight back. Many people in similar situations can't afford lawyers or professional inspections. They either pay unjust fines or live under constant threat of citation. That reality bothered me, so I wrote up my experience and shared it on neighborhood social media groups and HOA forums, hoping it might help others facing similar issues. The response was overwhelming. I received dozens of messages from people dealing with aggressive HOA enforcement, asking for advice on documentation, finding lawyers, and standing up to unreasonable board members. I helped where I could, sharing templates for formal responses, explaining document request procedures, and connecting people with resources. David, my lawyer, mentioned that he'd gotten several new clients who found him through my posts. He thanked me for the referrals and said he appreciated how I'd turned a negative experience into something useful for others. That meant a lot to me. By the fall of the second year after the generator citation first arrived, I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to live under constant scrutiny and fear of arbitrary fines. The neighborhood had become what it should have been all along, a pleasant community where people helped each other, maintained their properties responsibly, and handled disputes reasonably. Marcus Chen proved to be an excellent HOA president. He ran meetings efficiently, communicated clearly, and treated residents with respect. Under his leadership, the board focused on actual community improvements rather than enforcement actions. They repaved common area sidewalks, upgraded playground equipment, and organized social events that brought neighbors together. I attended most board meetings, not because I had to, but because I wanted to stay informed and contribute when I could. The meetings were productive now, focused on real issues rather than manufactured controversies. Other residents participated too, creating a genuinely collaborative atmosphere. The generator that had caused so much trouble continued to serve me well. It required regular maintenance, which I performed diligently, keeping detailed logs as I'd started doing during the conflict. Those logs proved useful not just for my own records, but also for helping neighbors who installed similar systems and wanted guidance on proper maintenance schedules. Winter brought another round of storms and power outages. My generator performed flawlessly, and I no longer worried about citations or complaints. Several neighbors actually expressed gratitude that I'd fought to establish clear generator policies, making it easier for them to install their own backup power systems. Frank Morrison came over one evening in December, 2 years after my initial citation, to watch a football game. We sat in my living room, powered by my generator during another outage, and reflected on everything that had happened. "You know what the real victory was," Frank said during halftime. "It wasn't beating Patricia or getting your money back. It was changing how the HOA operates. This neighborhood's better now because you didn't just roll over and accept bullying." He was right. The policies we'd implemented, the covenant revisions we'd passed, and the culture change on the board had improved things for everyone. Property values in Sunset Ridge estates had actually increased over the past 2 years, partly because the neighborhood had developed a reputation for being well-managed and resident-friendly. I thought about Patricia sometimes, wondering if she'd found peace in her downtown condo. I hoped she had, despite everything. People like her often acted from their own pain or need for control rather than malice. But I also knew that tolerating her behavior would have made things worse, both for me and for future residents who might have faced similar harassment. The legal system had worked the way it was supposed to. The settlement had provided accountability without requiring the time and expense of a full trial. The HOA's insurance company had enforced reasonable boundaries, and the board members had ultimately done the right thing by implementing reforms. As I sat there in my house, comfortable and secure even during a power outage, I felt genuine gratitude for having fought back. The generator hummed quietly outside, doing exactly what it was designed to do, providing reliable power when the grid failed. No smell complaints, no citations, no drama, just a properly installed piece of equipment serving its purpose. The game ended, Frank went home, and I went to bed listening to the familiar sound of my generator running. It was a good sound, representing not just backup power but also the principle that homeowners have the right to protect their property and stand up to unreasonable authority. That principle mattered more than any amount of settlement money or withdrawn citations. In the end, the story wasn't really about a generator at all. It was about community governance, personal responsibility, and the importance of documentation and persistence when facing unjust treatment. Those lessons would stay with me forever, and I hope they'd help others who found themselves in similar situations. The power came back on around midnight, and the generator automatically shut down after a brief transition period. I barely noticed. I was already asleep, dreaming of quieter times ahead.